Well, I'd like to welcome Tony. Tony, how are you doing today?
Hey, Matt. Good to see you again. And
Jim,
good to see you and Peter as well. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah. And so, Tony, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and tell us how you got into, kind of the space you're in. You're running your own, company.
Oh, golly. I think I had a bad dream some night, or made too many bets after having a few too many beers or something. That's probably about the most cogent explanation. But it's more that I had a chance. I worked with Ovum for a number of years and had a chance. They provided a great opportunity to develop this data practice. And I just found that basically a couple of years ago that there were a number of things that I wanted to do which really made sense to work independently. And so I've been now in business as DB Insight for now just a little over a year, about 13 months. And it's just been it's really been a fun ride and having a chance to really engage more closely with folks like yourselves.
Well, and what drew you to databases originally? Because you've been in the database space for a while and around this space for a while. I know you've written for ZDNet. You've
God. Throwing my past up against you. You're killing me. This sort of reminds me of an old, for anybody who remembers back the John Kerry, failed presidential campaign where we talked about that he was for something before he was against something before he was for it. And I could sort of say almost the same thing about databases in that I was initially covering databases back in the 90s when that was really the ascent of relational data. It was a time of transition, basically pretty much prompted by Y2K and the need for new transaction systems for those that weren't just prepared or ameliorated. And then what I found is that at the same time, we had this thing called the internet, which was starting to disrupt things. And the problem was that the internet was throwing at databases transaction loads that they just were not designed to handle. These are still on-premise databases. And so the lowly transaction monitor that all the database companies vowed to stamp out all of a sudden became the hidden hero of this is going to be the buffer. And so for about 10 years, I spent a journey in middleware because databases at the time you didn't have the cloud scale. You didn't have the linear scalability, the scale out architecture that we have today. And so I spent about 10 years in middleware, looking at all that and then realizing that this industry goes through a period of pendulum swings. That data volumes got so large, it was overwhelming the middleware. And so we're now starting to bring the compute back to the data. And so that's where I got back interested in databases again. I've been, back in the data space for roughly now about 10 years. This place, and the thing is that it's the type of thing which 20 years ago, what's relational is the default standard. Let's close the patent office. No, there are just so many exception cases, and even today, things are exploding. And now with cloud native, which basically which Jim had spoken about, Peter had spoken about, it's thrown databases totally in a whole. It's providing yet another sort of generational change in databases. So this field just doesn't get old.
Well, and you mentioned the pendulum swings, and I've noticed this for years where, you revisit technologies and trends, you swing one way and the other. And so for a while it was, you need to consolidate and you need bigger and you need less. And now it's more distributed, more complicated, more, everybody gets their own little piece of the pie. And that has driven a lot of this, cloud native setup. And so where do you see that pendulum swinging now? Is it, where's it headed?
You mean in terms of, well, okay. Well, in general, there are a lot of different ways to answer that question. And I'm glad we've got about 5 hours to do this now. But seriously, one is that I think I'm looking very much back at some of the comments that basically that Peter and Jim were making about the appeal of cloud native. The fact is that we're getting into such complex terrain at this point, both in terms of scale, in terms of complexity of data, in terms of multiplicity of data types, that the traditional sort of walled garden management approach, which is associated with on-premise traditional enterprise databases, is just hitting the wall. I think also the fact is we're seeing a generational change, in terms of how IT is being managed. And so there already was a secular trend towards how can we basically take advantage of the operational simplicity and agility that cloud native operation, can afford. And so that was already happening. And then this pandemic happened. And so if anything, one of the things that, that you've seen coming out of this is that anything that really is associated with cloud deployment and cloud native deployment is really becoming the big winner out of this, because organizations, enterprises are realizing more than ever that they have to do more with less, but they also need, but it's not just a matter of cost, like what Jim was saying in his survey. Cost used to be the criterion for going to cloud. Let's get some cheap compute cycles. Now it's more about reliability, step of reliability that basically that IT organizations cannot necessarily guarantee on premises, whether it be dealing with scale, whether it be dealing with denial of service attacks, and so on. So, talking about where the trends are going, this is kind of a limitless question. And again, this gets into the question about multi-model versus, fit for purpose. There are a lot of different ways. The fact is, what I see the pendulum is aiming at is how do we manage, complexity.
Well, and you talk about complexity. I know something that you've been writing quite a bit about is really on the hybrid, and how now we've crossed the chasm, and we're not just looking at on-prem or on cloud.
Right.
It's the hybrid default, you've called it.
Right.
And so tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in that space. Maybe set the stage for.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what Peter and Jim said kind of feed directly into this, which is that organizations, as I was just saying, are seeking, well, one is that for a lot of their application and databases, they're reaching the end of sort of generational life cycles. And these have gone in roughly 20, 25-year cycles up till now. And right now we're getting towards the end of the cycle that really started with, Y2K. I mean, folks like SAP and Oracle are saying, hey, you migrated to our enterprise apps, in year 2000. Now it's time to look at the next generation of apps. And those apps are increasingly cloud native. And so it's just like Y2K drove enterprises to reappraise, where they need to be in with how they manage technology and what their systems would be deployed on. I think this whole notion of cloud native is forcing, it's prompting another sort of round of new decisions. Now, as Jim said, on-premise is not going away. And from that standpoint, as enterprises start to look at what do we do with our business critical systems, these were not necessarily the first systems that went into the cloud. They start to look at what are our options here. And in some cases, public cloud deployment may be fine, but there may be other cases, where basically maybe internal policy, which is that we cannot have our, business critical data in a public cloud where it might share a tenant, basically share a tenant with, let's say, our rivals, or it might be
there's a
regulatory.
lot like retail space, where there are a lot of retailers who don't want to put their data on Amazon because they're worried about that.
Well, of course, then Microsoft will be glad to sell you an Azure cloud.
Oh, of course. Right.
But which makes life but directly exactly to your point, there are going to be reasons why for certain applications or for certain data, public cloud is not going to be a comfortable choice. And so I see hybrid as being essentially kind of the next frontier. And what got me interested in this was that over about the past now, I guess, year and a half, 18, 24 months, we've seen virtually every platform and major cloud provider introduce their own, basically, plant their stakes in the ground with hybrid. And we're basically, where my consciousness really got raised on this was when Amazon basically surprised us, did a total end around, this is from the analyst community, back at reInvent 2018, now a year and a half ago. And usually before these conferences, we get pre-briefed and we get an idea as to what the agenda was. Outposts was not part of the pre-brief. and all of a sudden
It was one of those secret ones that were going to surprise
exactly
everybody.
just it was unleashed at the left, and it just caught everybody. It's like having to change. All the analysts had to change their diapers at that point, and so that really said something to me, that Amazon, which to me has been associated very much with with we need to control our environment, was willing to say we're now going to sell hardware that will sit outside our data centers, and it just blew me away.
Well,
the other thing about go ahead.
Like some of the cloud vendors, isn't this moving them more into like an enterprise software company? I mean,
oh heck yes.
Amazon is very they're very focused on Outposts, and they want you to use their hardware and they ship it. But Azure and GCP, they're looking at technologies and software to manage other cloud providers. I know Amazon doesn't like the word multi-cloud. That's a very bad word. But it seems
I've heard that at some cloud provider trade shows that you're not allowed to use the term multi-cloud. I will not mention who. But it's what's fascinating to me, and it's both a measure of how young and undefined this space, or vaguely defined this space is that the definitions of hybrid cloud and the definitions of hybrid cloud product are all over the map. You have everything ranging from, say, a vendor-managed turnkey system. It's a classic turnkey system. I mean, this is not a new model, which would describe Outposts, which would also describe Oracle Cloud at Customer. And there's a certain, if you want basically a black box system, and you want the vendor to basically, leave the driving to the vendor, that could be a very attractive solution if that is what your goal is. You then have, at the other end of the spectrum, you have Google and IBM that basically are looking at this more from the standpoint of software-defined sort of virtualization, essentially, virtualization in a cloud-native, type of mode, where you look at, let's say, Anthos and OpenShift. Each of them sharing some common components, but also some different components, and even with some of the common components, such as Istio, managing them very differently. So in a way, it's kind of like Unix is. And then you have Microsoft, which has probably about a half dozen different offerings that are just all over the map. Whether you have an OEM play like Stack, whether you have, and now Stack is actually 3 different products, which is, there's also Stack Edge, which is a different product from now Stack Hub, which was the original Stack. And then you have Stack HCI, which is basically a backup appliance, very different, just common branding. And then you have Azure Arc, which is, well, you can have Kubernetes, or you can have the control plane of your choice. And now to really basically kind of stir up the pot, on the Amazon side, you have RDS over VMware, where Amazon is saying, hey, we'll even manage RDS on somebody else, on commodity hardware. It's like, it's all over the map. What it really means is, one, the field is young, but also there are so many different definitions. And actually, Matt, what I'd like to do at this point is prompt a poll question here, because I'd like to get a sense of how the audience sees this, which is basically about what hybrid cloud means to you. It's the second of the questions there. Can we pop this up on the screen?
Val, can you put up the question? Oh, it just popped up. Look at that.
Wow, the magic of Zoom. And so basically, I wanted to ask, I said, given all the definitions that are out there, I want to get a sense of, what folks who are tuning into us, think it means to us. So the question is, what does hybrid cloud mean to you? Now, with this type of poll, you can't make 2 choices. So choose the one that best applies to your organization, realizing that reality be more shades of gray. But the choices are: it's a cloud platform that only runs on premises. Or the next choice is, it's a cloud platform that can run on premises or in the cloud. Or another choice is a cloud platform that allows databases or applications to run unchanged in a private cloud on premises and the public cloud. And the last one is, you're going to punt. You're unsure what this means. So, as I said, because I got it, this is so confusing out there. Maybe I'm tipping my hand.
I think this gets back to, this is really the goal of the hybrid, or in most companies or most spaces that I've seen, is It's the desire to run wherever you want, whenever you want, whatever you want. Right. And I think that's, what, people will see. So, poll went away, so I don't know.
Oh, boy. Okay. And
I see the results. Oh, look at the results came up. All right.
Wow. Okay. Let's see here.
So 15 people, 60% said a cloud platform that allows databases or applications to run unchanged in a private, on-prem, and public cloud. So it's the everything.
Yeah. And you know something? Basically, it really goes back to, I think, what Jim was saying and what I've been saying, which is that what cloud native means, the reason why enterprises are looking at the cloud is because they want that simplicity. And part of that simplicity is that if they have a database or an application running in a cloud on premises, they want to be able to then seamlessly say, something, we need to burst this to public cloud, or there may be certain instances that we may want to run in a public cloud, and or because of, let's say, certain policies or for uptime, that we need to have at least a second public cloud. We may run we may run, let's say, 10 of our instances in AWS, and we may run 2 in Azure, or vice versa, because we need to have that that fallback.
And where this gets complicated is in the database space, because as you start to move from provider to provider, especially in the database as a service space, there's nuances and there's incompatibilities between their implementations. Like, Peter had mentioned the open source compatible, which is a nice way of sort of saying not open source, but, it should work one way, as Peter mentioned, into our cloud, yes, but coming out, it kind of breaks that move from place to place.
Oh gosh, yes. And the thing is that it then depends on, it goes back to that when you're making a choice on an enterprise platform, at some point you have to make a choice on where your vendor dependency lies. Does it lie with basically the provider that basically supports your database? Does it lie essentially with the database itself? Does it lie with the application provider and what they support? You ultimately need to make, there's at least one point on the stack, unless you're willing to basically do a homegrown implementation yourself, that I'm going to implement MySQL myself, I'm going to implement Kubernetes myself, I'm going to use, let's say, something like OpenShift, and I'm going to do this all myself. It's in a sense, it's kind of like living off the grid and generating all your own power. And yes, you can still eat, but on the other hand, if I'm living off the grid and I still want to communicate, I still have to rely on an internet provider. So I still have a vendor reliance there. And it's going to be the same thing with cloud databases, with hybrid databases. At some point in the stack, you're going to have to make a choice.
Yeah, and I mean, there's providers who will help run those, like we do that.
Sure.
Right? So it's important to realize that you're not alone on that. It's just there's the trade-off between portability and lock-in. Right. So if the requirement is that you need to be able to run in all these different cloud providers and on-prem and all these locations and move around, then that is something that these vendors tend to try and lock you in. And Jojo Thomas posted this question, which is kind of relevant to this. Every cloud provider will want to promote their cloud, but then they also tend to push a certain database. How do you ensure that they are not trying to sell you their preferred brands as opposed to providing shelf space for better database vendors to run in the cloud space? Can database vendors just focus on the database and cloud providers just focus on the cloud space? I don't think they will ever just focus on one another.
No.
I think they will play nice eventually, but there is that.
Well, what is interesting, though, is that getting beyond the managed services, Amazon, I mean, to an extent, this is pretty much true with almost each of the major public clouds, is that they'll run their own managed services, but they'll be more than happy to host, if you're a third-party vendor, your own managed service on the cloud. And a great example,
I'm sure MongoDB gives Amazon a lot of money. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
exactly. So I'm sure that they're not unhappy with that relationship.
I mean, and they were exactly the example. You read my mind. They were exactly the example I was thinking of. I mean, you talk about two very heavy competitors, MongoDB and Oracle, and yet probably, I don't know the exact numbers, but I would presume since I think they started on AWS that Mongo's Atlas install base on AWS is probably their largest install base at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a funny, co-opetition is a very funny thing in the cloud, but part of it is that, let's face it, there's only room for it, just like it's the same thing with utility transmission networks. You may have a choice of multiple sources of electricity now that we've deregulated it, but ultimately you have one transmission grid in your neighborhood, and that's what these cloud providers are.
Well, yeah, and I mean, databases are part of that infrastructure. They're
Exactly.
part of the core foundation, the infrastructure that's out there. So, they fall into that, and this is just another value-added service on top of it. Because honestly, cloud providers probably make what 20 times what they make in just regular cloud services than they do in a database, right? Database is a small fraction of what they do, but I think it kind of locks people in a bit because wherever you run your data, that's where you want to run your applications.
Well, put it this way. I think in many ways, I mean, it's kind of from the old enterprise applications playbook, which is that if you go into our ecosystem and take our lock-in, you get access to all our services and all the services of our in our partner community. And so what each of the providers are basically trying to entice you on, I mean, like for instance, like look with Azure with Synapse, for instance, which is to say, look, we will integrate in. Well, number one, we'll plug in Data Factory, so you'll have your data pipelines directly into this data warehouse. It's going to be an all-encompassing data warehouse experience. I have a piece that's appearing on ZDNet today. It's SAP HANA is celebrating its 10th anniversary, and they're taking a very similar tack with SAP Data Warehouse Cloud, which is that they packaged in the they say, hey, you take our cloud on whichever cloud provider, but you basically take our data warehouse. That means that we will bundle in an end-to-end experience that will give you the visualization, which comes straight from the SAP Analytics Cloud. And now they're also starting to package in some basic, kind of some of the front end, or I should say, some of the basically the back end data integration. Basically, the data federation, and the data movement. We'll package this in as part of the experience. You'll get this, you'll get a data warehouse from SAP that will package in more services than you would get, say, with Redshift. So I mean, whereas with Amazon, what Amazon will say is, by taking Redshift, you take all these others, you can get ready integration to all the other AWS services, whether it be Kinesis or whether it be SageMaker and so on and so forth. The list goes on. So I think it's whether you're a cloud provider, whether you're a database provider, it's all part of the same playbook.
So let's shift gears a little bit because we've been talking a lot about the cloud providers, but I mean, one of the disruptive technologies, or you might call an enabling technology, is Kubernetes.
Yes,
we've been talking a lot about that. So why is this something that is so disruptive in your opinion? Why has it just jumped in popularity?
Well, and Jim was starting to get into this, and this is actually where I wish we kind of had a little bit of a panel discussion here. Put it this way: you look at the existing cloud database services, whether it be your Aurora, Redshift, RDS, whatever. They're built on basically previous generation virtualization. Most of it, I think, is generally the Zen hypervisor. If you go into Azure, it'll be Hyper-V, et cetera, et cetera. What Kubernetes does is it kind of frees, it's a new take on virtualization. Number one, obviously, we're losing the baggage of the operating system. But two, what to me, what it's all about is it's about extensibility. So yes, what it means is that if you're taking, let's say, one of these, and it's kind of funny to call it legacy cloud services. If you're now, looking to run some new database or some new services, Kubernetes is a great way to, to integrate in, going through the various, Kubernetes, services that each of the cloud providers are running. Now, what that also means, though, is that for third-party databases, whether it be the MySQLs of the world, MariaDBs, or what have you, or the various flavors of Postgres, this is a way to engineer a cloud-native, basically database as a service that can run on any of these clouds with relatively, minimal sort of, modification, as long as you take basically the, I mean, obviously, it'll need to basically hook into the Kubernetes cluster or service that the cloud provider runs. That's where I really I see it provides a great launch pad for third party databases service, and also creates a great launch pad for making a multi-cloud database as a service doable. I'd like to this one. Matt? Do we have any time to pop up one last poll question? Because we have one on Kubernetes here.
Yeah. Val,
okay. It's the last one. It's the one on. Yep. There we go. Thanks, Val. And again, choose one. But this is basically dealing with, and Jim was starting to get into this before, and so let's just ask this straight of you folks that are tuned in. Basically, what's the degree of Kubernetes awareness or readiness in your organization? And so there are four answers here. 91 is correct. Choose what applies. The first is we do not have any Kubernetes skills internally. The second is we're just starting to learn about it. The third is that we expect the service provider, say a database as a service provider, to manage Kubernetes and keep it under the hood, keep it under the black box. And the fourth is, I'm not going to give my hand away here, but I think it'll be pretty obvious. We have Kubernetes skills and we are using them, and we're planning to use them to run databases and applications in a cloud, whether it be public, private, or hybrid. And
we asked a similar question last year and this year in our survey. I haven't analyzed the data from this year's survey yet.
Right.
But last year, about a third were running in Kubernetes in production. So
I think that but keep in mind, I think you folks speak to a very technically astute, technically advanced, part of the market. So I don't think you guys typify it. I think you have a crowd that tends to be ahead of the curve. My own views on this is that I think most organizations are not going. There are going to be some that do. I think most organizations are not. They're going to expect more. This is going to be something that makes the database as a service platform from their provider, or let's say the machine learning platform from their provider, more portable.
So interesting. I just had a conversation with somebody this week, internally here, and we're getting customers who are coming to us who are building their own databases as service.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, we're talking Fortune 500, financial institutions, and retailers, things like that.
Yeah. And as I expected, you have your audience is so way ahead of the curve. You're kind of blowing me away. I mean,
well, we should put that on a T-shirt. Maybe for our next conference, we can be the technically astute audience that is ahead of the curve.
Or just say, the Percona crowd ahead of the curve.
There you go.
Or Percona ahead of the curve. No, I mean, as I said, and that's why, and this is why I so especially miss that we can't meet in person this year, because just I love going to your events and just putting an ear to the floor. Not saying anything, just hearing what people are talking about, because these people know their stuff. They know their stuff. But anyway, so the thing is that's I mean, my sense is that I think Kubernetes is really more the ticket to the future for like database as a service platforms to go multi-cloud, to be more multi-cloud, to provide basically customers the option of getting the convenience that they traditionally could only get in a cloud vendor proprietary database as a service, getting that advantage of that in something that's more portable across other clouds.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you a bold question.
Uh-oh.
Bold. Okay, and the next, let's say by 2025, will something like Kubernetes overtake and supplant the proprietary cloud providers' databases as services? Will they start to move and we're just going to all run it like everybody else?
I don't know if it'll supplant so much because I think once you move onto a database, migrating away, there's pain.
Yeah, it's hard.
But I think where the opportunity is with greenfield. There's going to be a lot of greenfield databases coming in, and this is going to be. I see that as being really the opportunity.
Yeah.
All right. 5 years ago, mark me if I'm wrong.
All right.
I'll live and die on that one.
I appreciate you coming and spending some time with us.
It was a lot of fun.
Questions? Are there any questions anybody wanted to ask Tony? Feel free to put them in the chat, or Q&A, but I don't see any going on. But it was great chatting with you, and
My pleasure.
I appreciate your time.